Chapter 2 asks a deceptively simple question. What changes when the brain becomes a dataset? The answer goes well beyond the digitization of another category of personal information. Neuroactivity becomes material for model training, pattern extraction, and anticipatory intervention. Thought no longer appears only as subjective experience. It enters technical pipelines in which signals are captured, cleaned, labeled, stored, combined, and translated into predictions. The chapter follows that movement from a philosophical idea of thought as the final frontier through real-time decoding and cognitive commodification to the claim that law must protect mental sovereignty. Its central insight is that exploitation does not begin only when someone sells a brain scan. It begins when cognition becomes a reusable computational resource capable of informing systems that may operate far from the context, purpose, and relationship in which the original signal arose. The chapter begins with the legal and philosophical status of the inner forum. Freedom of thought has often appeared absolute because law regarded the mind as a citadel beyond direct observation. That practical inaccessibility supported belief, dissent, and self-authorship. Neurotechnology destabilizes the settlement. When models can reconstruct semantic content, identify affective states, or anticipate intention from neurosignals, the question shifts from whether thought remains hidden to whether it remains authorial. A system that acts before conscious articulation does more than observe an already completed mental event. It participates in the environment through which that event becomes meaningful. The chapter's question, displayed at the bottom of the slide, is therefore exact. Does a thought remain free once it becomes computationally inferable? The answer cannot turn on perfect mind reading. Probabilistic inference already becomes legally significant when employers, platforms, or governments treat it as a basis for action. Table 2.1 performs essential conceptual work. Biometric data generally establishes identity through comparatively stable features such as fingerprints, facial geometry, or iris patterns. Neurodata originates in nervous system activity and derives value from variation across time, task, and context. It does not merely tell a system who the subject is. It can support inferences about attention, emotion, cognitive workload, recognition, or intention. That difference changes the legal stakes. A biometric mismatch may deny access. A neural inference may alter how an institution understands the subject's capacity, disposition, or future. The chapter is careful to reject a crude equation between a brain signal and a thought. Neurodata becomes meaningful through computationally modeling, pre-processing, and labels. Yet that mediation does not make it ordinary. It makes the inferential architecture central. The law must govern how a dynamic, physiological trace becomes an authoritative cognitive claim, not simply how the raw signal is stored. This slide traces the move from recording to translation. EEG can supply fast temporal signals. fMRI can map spatially distributed activity. Invasive and non-invasive brain-computer interfaces can connect pre-action signals to external systems. Machine learning turns those inputs into text, visual reconstruction, commands, or estimates of cognitive state. We should resist sensational language. These systems do not extract a pristine sentence hidden inside the brain. They construct outputs through training data, pre-processing choices, and probabilistic association. Even so, the practical result is transformative. The temporal distance between neural activity and machine response contracts. The interface no longer waits for deliberate expression. It anticipates motor intention, semantic content, or effective change. The brain becomes both source and operational substrate. Once the system can respond within that loop, the regulatory issue is no longer passive observation. It is whether machine interpretation begins to structure cognition before the subject can evaluate or refuse it. Sophie's workplace wellness system predicts stress before she feels it. Lighting softens. A breathing prompt appears and her calendar changes. The intervention seems caring, even trivial, yet the scenario identifies a deep legal harm. The system has acquired temporal primacy. Sophie waits for the feeling to catch up with the model's forecast. Her emotional experience begins to appear as confirmation of an external prediction rather than as something she first interprets for herself. This is not conventional privacy breach. No secret has been disclosed after the event. The displacement occurs through premature recognition. The chapter therefore reframes cognitive privacy as a question of sequence and authority. The self should remain the first interpreter of its own mental states. When a system acts earlier, its probability can become a script, shaping how the subject understands what follows. The problem is epistemic, constitutive, and difficult to repair after the prediction has already entered the environment. The chapter's most ambitious move appears here. Neural interfaces generate continuous, multidimensional datasets that models use to associate signal patterns with attention, affect, recognition, and preparatory intention. This produces what the book calls the pattern modeling paradigm, a fifth digital era in which the objective is no longer simply to collect records of past behavior, but to model cognition in the not yet conscious present. The feedback loop is decisive. The user's neural activity trains the system. The system then adapts content, timing, or stimulation in response. Those adjustments generate new cognitive signals, which refine the model again. The person is therefore not merely a data subject supplying static information. The person becomes part of an iterative learning environment. Agency grows distributed and porous as the system scaffolds the cognitive processes it is simultaneously measuring. Law organized around one-off collection and downstream use struggles to see this recursive relationship. Neurocapitalism describes the conversion of neural and affective states into predictive assets. Research repositories and clinical datasets support valuable science, but their infrastructure can also feed commercial models whose future uses the original participants never anticipated. Follow the pipeline on the slide: acquisition, pre-processing, cloud storage, and analysis, then feedback to a user or institution. Each stage redistributes control. Cross-border transfer adds another layer. Formal protections may attach to the original data in Europe, yet the cognitive capacity can return as a trained model, inferred profile, or API output that no longer looks like neurodata at all. The key mobile asset is therefore not always the signal, it is the learned association. Once a model can infer focus, fatigue, or susceptibility, that capacity can operate in workplaces, platforms, or security environments without repeating the original neural collection. Cognitive commodification turns the brain into a calibration resource for systems deployed at scale. The GDPR can reach neurodata when it relates to an identifiable person, reveals health information, or serves biometric identification. But the chapter argues that this coverage remains structurally incomplete. Commercially valuable inferences about attention, fatigue, affect, or volition may sit between established categories. Consent also performs poorly in continuous preconscious processing. A person cannot meaningfully specify every future inference or secondary model use when the relevant cognitive state has not yet entered awareness. This is why the slide distinguishes mental privacy from mental sovereignty. Privacy is defensive. It asks who may access or disclose mental information. Sovereignty is constitutive. It protects the self's primacy in defining, understanding, and disclosing thought. The harm therefore shifts from misuse of information to usurpation of meaning-making. Regulation must address not only collection, but the institutional authority to interpret a person's mind and act on that interpretation before the person can respond. The brain as dataset is not a metaphor for greater sensitivity. It names a new institutional arrangement. Neurosignals and their proxies become training resources. Models convert them into portable insight. Platforms, employers, insurers, and governments can then embed that insight into environments that anticipate and shape conduct. Once this architecture exists, privacy cannot be reduced to secrecy, and regulation cannot be reduced to securing a database. The relevant questions concern temporal primacy, cognitive exploitation, and the preservation of mental sovereignty. Who knows first? Who is allowed to act? Which inferences may travel? What remedy exists once a model has already altered the subject's opportunities or self-understanding? Chapter 2 insists that the mind's legal protection must extend to the pipelines and systems that render cognition operational. Do not forget to check out the next video in the series, where we turn to Chapter 3, Decoding the Mind, and examine the societal risks when neurodata is captured and used in policing.